And now, welcome to an evening with young men resolute in their faith in Christ Jesus. That faith leads them to take a stand for truth and justice. They would now like to share their perspective with you on what is going on around us. From an undisclosed location in Middle Tennessee, we are the Patriots of Faith. Good afternoon, Tyler.
Good afternoon, Jordan.
Now, our intro said evening, but it's not quite evening yet, as you can see by the little bit of light we still have coming in this afternoon.
So I was at a Chinese restaurant today, and someone that I was with had a fortune cookie that had a interesting message on it that I think would apply to voters for Hillary Clinton. If you don't think about the future, you can't have one. So that's what I wanted to open up with today. But we've got quite a few news stories to cover. Of course, we haven't met for a couple weeks, but we're going to try to quickly cover some of the things that have happened within the last couple weeks.
And speaking of Clinton, we'll have some coverage on some recent developments on the 2016 front coming up here shortly, but we got some other details before that.
Absolutely. First of all, there was a shooting in Texas at the shooting was a potential shooting, but the police were actually able to keep it under control, but it was almost a potential disaster. I guess it was, when did it happen, Jordan? Over a week ago, I know.
2 weeks ago, this last weekend. I guess it was 2 weeks ago Sunday, I think it was.
Okay,
it was May 3rd is what I'm seeing here.
Mm-hmm. But there were two, from what I understand, they were affiliated with ISIS. Two people affiliated with ISIS who had planned to conduct a massacre at a event that was aimed at cartoons that were making fun of Muhammad. And they had planned to go in there and execute all the people that were involved. But the police were able to, they saw the people, I think they saw them with the guns, and one of the police was able to shoot them down.
Yes.
Actually, they were trying to shoot the police first so they could get in. But the police were able to gun them both down. And it was amazing because I think these ISIS people, they had really like military guns, and the police just had the pistols, I believe.
It was at the Curtis Colwell Center in Garland, Texas. That's in the Dallas Metroplex, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area. It was May 3rd, and what happened was a security officer from the Garland Independent School District, he was shot in the ankle, one of the security officers, but a police officer, traffic cop, I guess it was, from what I can remember, actually caught on to the situation quickly, and he ended up taking out the two suspects.
Also, speaking of ISIS, the senior leader for ISIS was executed in a ground raid by U.S. forces on, I believe it was it Saturday or
Saturday.
Friday night? But despite that, ISIS is also taking over Ramadi, the city of Ramadi, which is close to Baghdad, and it's actually a pretty large city, from what I understand. And Iraqi forces are fleeing the city, so ISIS looks like it's taking over that city. So that's not a good sign.
Reminds me of that terror group, was it Hydra? That's on Captain America. Cut one head off, two more will take its place. You've got a step backwards. This senior ISIS commander, his name was Abu Sayyaf, and it was a special operations forces raid. It's amazing once you actually hear the coverage of the raid and the different folks that were actually there that have reported about it. It's amazing what all they went through. We had a lot of special operatives that went in there, and it was in what's officially Syria territory. But I mean, they take out this ISIS commander, and at the same time, like you said, here in the city of Ramadi, they've actually captured that Iraqi city after a lot of work, and they put there's been a lot of days they've been trying to capture that city, and the city's fallen. From what I heard today, I think there's about 800,000 people that lived in that city, but for weeks now, people have been evacuating because of the danger. And I saw here just a little short while ago, I actually saw a little bit more about that. I'm trying to look that up here real quick because I saw an update about that just a short while ago. They said about how many people they thought were killed in the assault there. I'll find it here in a second. If you want to pick up on something else, I'll find that.
Well, we were talking about Hillary Clinton. First of all, she and Bill there were reports on both CNN and Fox News, I'm sure a whole bunch of other sources as well. Fox said $25 million, CNN said $30 million, but the Clintons have collected either $30 or $25 million in just being paid for public speaking engagements since January of 2014. So that's something big that's come out on them. Also, Hillary Clinton has made a statement at some kind of a conference for women regarding abortion. She said people are going to have to change their religious beliefs. And so that is a very disturbing statement there that she made. Another thing with Hillary Clinton, she said that as her choice of running mate, she would have Julian Castro as that person. And Jordan has some more on that.
Going back real quick, I did find that real quick on the fall of Ramadi. The New York Times is reporting that the spokesman for Anbar's governor, which is where this happened in Iraq, he had said that 500 civilians and security personnel had been killed over the past 2 days. So it's been awful butchering going on there. But going back to what you're saying there with Julian Castro. Julian Castro used to be the mayor of San Antonio, Texas, from 2009 to 2014. And after that, he was tapped to become Obama's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. He was the first Hispanic that was able to give a address at the Democratic convention too. So they've been trying to kind of, I guess they groomed him for a role nationally for some time. But what's interesting about him as well, I had pulled up an article on, we could probably cover more of this in detail at another point as time goes along, especially if he does get selected, because there's so much to cover. But he is, according to some people, the next Obama. This is actually an article from Breitbart back in 2012, right around the time of the convention. And it said, while Obama's radicalism had maybe escaped the notice of the Democrat convention in 2004, Castro's views are a bit more transparent. His brother actually ran for Congress, so it's almost a family affair with them. But they learned their politics on their mother's knee and in the streets of San Antonio. Their mother, Rosie, helped found a radical anti-white socialist Chicano party called La Raza Unida, which means the race united. And they seek to create a separate country, which is called Aztlan in the Southwest, which has to try to take the Southwest away from the United States and bring it back into more of a Mexico fold. So I don't know if Hillary's going to want to have, even though maybe he may not have those beliefs, but I mean, he was raised with those beliefs, so you would think that there might be some attached there, but you don't know if, I wouldn't think that you would want to have those kind of beliefs tied into your administration or into your campaign when you're already got all these scandals like we've been talking about all around. And Bill Clinton even mentioned recently when the press asked him if he wanted to continue giving speeches, he said, well, yeah, I've got to pay the bills. And I mean, sure, no one can blame someone for doing all these speeches, but at the same time, with how much money is being paid for speeches as you go back and look at time, I mean, you can't really say that you're the candidate of the working man or of the middle class if you're worried about paying bills with $1 million salary for one speech.
And as many public speaking engagements as she's been involved in, you would think she would have answered more questions. Carly Fiorina pointed out in an interview with Meet the Press that in the time she had been running for president, she had answered over 300 questions from the media. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, at that time, had only answered 8. So that kind of speaks to her character.
And at some point in a special segment, we could actually talk about the mechanics and other things of a campaign as well too. But right now, if I was Hillary Clinton, I'd want a challenger, because right now she's going to go through these next few months. People think that the Republican Party having all these candidates jumping to the fray is going to cause a big fight. There's going to be a lot of negativity coming out, and everything else is just going to destroy the nominee coming out. But that's not necessarily true. You go back and look at political history. Usually, if you have a challenger, just like anything else, competition breeds you to become the best you can be. So all these Republicans, whoever comes out of the top is going to be the most tried and tested, and as far as a candidate goes. But Hillary, if she doesn't get a serious nominee soon, Bernie Sanders is not going to be a serious opponent, and neither is Jim Webb, or even Martin O'Malley may come on the scene. But now with everything going on in Baltimore lately, I mean, a lot of that stuff has been kind of fostering under his watch. So unless Hillary gets a serious challenger sometime soon, she might actually have a hard time trying to. She may have a hard time trying to get a good shot at the nomination as far as her being tested goes and everything.
Quickly, last week there was a train crash near Philadelphia involving the Amtrak train line. And Jordan knows a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I was actually keeping up with that when that became a breaking story. We have the casualty total, as far as we know, is 8, and over 200 people have been injured. This has become a big issue. Of course, it's an awful tragedy, and there's been other things that happened in the past. 1943, there was a train derailment on the same section of track here in the Frankfurt section of Philadelphia, and that killed 79 and injured 117. So it is a tricky curve, but there's been a lot of discrepancy on what the situation is. We don't know a cause yet. There's several different potential causes, but we do know that the speed was twice that of the post speed limit 50 miles an hour over that curve, and the train was going at least 106 before the emergency parking brake was initiated. But there's reports that maybe objects were thrown at the windshield of the engine of the train too, so we do not know yet what the cause was. But the situation, even though it's a tragedy, has been really transformed into more of a political talking point, because now you've got Democrats, other folks coming out there saying, well, this wouldn't have happened if Amtrak was better funded. But it's not a funding issue, because, I mean, when you're going twice the posted speed limit, funding can't do anything about that. And really, this would also be another good segment to have down the road, talking about maybe economics and too much bureaucracy. But really, Amtrak, I've said even since high school, I was in high school 10 years ago, and I've been saying that Amtrak really should be a private corporation. That's actually what was intended back in 1971 when Amtrak was created. It was intended to go back to private ownership, but it's been allowed to become a government organization for so many years. And if they'd spin it off to public shareholders, I would believe that it would help the budget so much more, but also help the quality of Amtrak service a lot better too. Might have less of a chance of stuff like this happening.
2 more quick things in the news, and then we're going to have to cut it off for now. But Al Sharpton's daughter, the Reverend Al Sharpton, has said that she is going to sue New York City for $5 million because she sprained her ankle on a city sidewalk. Just something to throw out there. Yet she hiked up a mountain with that sprained ankle. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about, and we're going to mention this briefly, there was a biker gang showdown in Waco, Texas. 9 people were killed, and I think it was 176 people were arrested in that biker gang shootout. And so that's a tragedy that's happened there.
The amazing thing about that, though, is there was no bystanders. It was a busy shopping area where this restaurant was that all this took place, and it went out into the streets. It came out, it started in the restroom of the restaurant we hear, and then started spilling out to the parking lot. But from what's reported, there has been no injuries or fatalities to any other patrons of the restaurant or to shoppers out in the general shopping area, other than the folks involved with the biking gang. So that was almost a miracle in itself right there.
Definitely. But we are running out of time, so we will have to cut it off here. But we are the Patriots of Faith, and we will return next segment.
Thank you for giving your time to us today. Welcome back. We're the Patriots of Faith. I'm Jordan Iwanez.
And I'm Tyler Kalk. And we're going to do a shorter show today for the sake of time. But we're going to go ahead and jump to our biblical segment. And I wanted to talk about something different today. We've been talking about the power of different things. We talked about the power, last time we talked about the power of one. We started with the power of love and talked about the power of integrity, power of the cross, and maybe a couple other things. But we're going to go off of that series today. And we concluded that last week. But today I want to talk about something that's very applicable in each of our lives, and that is trusting in Jesus and founding our lives completely upon Him. A lot of times we like to trust in ourselves. We like to think, oh, I can do this. I don't need God's help. I can do this by my own ability. Well, there's a lot of times where we can't, where without Jesus we're going to struggle. in the storms that we face in our lives and the troubles that we face. So let's go to Matthew chapter 7, and we're going to start here at verse 24. Jesus, this is in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." So founding our lives upon Jesus, that involves obedience to him. And our lives need to be founded on obedience to him because he is the rock. He is the rock that's going to keep our lives from crashing down into disaster. And a lot of times when we trust in ourselves, we find ourselves in a disaster of a situation. Jesus, though, he says, "Obey me, trust in me, found your life upon me, and I'll take care of you." So let's go, we're going to look at a few accounts here. First, let's go to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. And we're going to start here in verse 22. This is right after Jesus has fed the 5,000. And we all know this account, but let's read it. "Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he sent the crowds away. After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, 'It is a ghost.' And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, 'Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid.' Peter said to him, 'Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water.' And he said, 'Come.' And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.' Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, 'You have little faith, why did you doubt?' When they got into the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'You are certainly God's Son.'" So many times as Christians, we see what Jesus has been able to do in our lives. Yet we get in the midst of one of these storms of life. We have something that we struggle with. We have either some temptation we're dealing with or some life situation that's very difficult. And we've seen what Jesus has done for us. We've seen his power already. Yet at this time we begin to doubt. We begin to doubt it. And then when we begin to doubt Jesus, our life begins to sink. We begin to sink just like Peter did. And so what we need to do is to keep our eyes on him. Keep our focus on him. Don't doubt him. Trust him. And just found our lives upon him. Don't trust in ourselves. But remember that he can do all things and that he is capable of helping us through these storms. And that we just need to keep our eyes on him, fix our eyes on the cross, and keep our lives founded upon that. And he will take care of us during these times, and he will help us through our storms of life. Next, let's go to Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6. And we're going to read the same account here as we just read. Except it's a different account, this time by Mark. And we're going to do the same thing again with John's account. But I'm going to take a different lesson out of each of these accounts for us to look at. So starting in verse 45 of Mark chapter 6, it says, "Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the crowd away. After bidding them farewell, he left for the mountain to pray. When it was evening, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea, and he intended to pass them by. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed that it was a ghost, and cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke with them and said to them, 'Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid.' Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished, for they had not gained any insight from the incidents of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. Does our heart ever get hard? Do we ever get to the point to where we see what Jesus says, we know what he can do, but still our heart's hard. We don't really accept it. We find it hard to accept. And then as a result, we trust in ourselves. Do we ever find ourselves in that situation? When it comes to trusting God, our heart needs to be completely open to Him. And we need to know that He can help us. And we need to be willing to accept whatever He's given us in His Word and whatever situation that He's allowing us to endure, because we know it's for the best. And so we can't let our heart get hardened toward God. And the last point I would like to make is, we'll go to John chapter 6. John chapter 6. And again, here's the same event that's happening, but we will talk about it in more detail. John chapter 6, starting in verse 16. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, and after getting into a boat, they started to cross the sea to Capernaum. It had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea began to be stirred up because a strong wind was blowing. Then when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near to the boat. And they were frightened, but he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." So they were willing to receive him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Jesus was the one who told them to go out to sea, right? Jesus was the one who told them that. So basically they had already been promised that they were going to make it to the other side. Yet when they saw him, they were frightened, and when they saw this storm, that they were frightened. And it says that they had already gone 3 or 4 miles. They'd already gone 3 or 4 miles. When you find yourself in the midst of these storms of life, remember, don't give up. You're already part of the way there. Jesus has promised you as a Christian that you're going to have eternal life. So don't give up. Don't stop going headed that way just because you're facing a trial, because you know that Jesus is going to get you through it. We have to put our entire trust in Him and found our lives upon obedience to His will and upon trust in Him and not trust in ourselves. Don't give up. Trust in Him. Don't doubt Him, because He can do what He's promised He's going to be able to do if we found our lives upon Him. Do you have anything to add, Jordan?
Well, always a great example from Scripture too is, it's back in the Old Testament, but Job. I mean, Job's a great example. Here's a man that he didn't really do anything that we know of that was just awful. I mean, when we think about awful consequences happening, somebody we're like, oh, they must have deserved that. But Job, as far as we know, he never did anything to deserve what had come his way. I mean, he was simply just enjoying time with his family, a very wealthy person, but Satan came to God and he pretty much targeted, Satan targeted, here's this person that if awful things happen to him, that he'll leave you. And he was tested time and time again, and even his own family, his own friends, Job's own family and friends approached him and said, hey, you must have done something awful. I mean, just turn away from God. But Job said, should we not accept good from God, but also adversity? He said that, and he said that he actually rebuked his own wife. He rebuked his friends for trying to tempt him. So Job is a great example, someone that we should look to. And we even see that at the end of the book. Of course, we don't have time to cover all the book of Job, but at the end of the book, we find that Job had everything restored to him. He had all those possessions restored to him, and it said even in Scripture he was blessed more than he was even beforehand, because he stayed fast to God. So that's what we must do in these times when we face trial, in those times we face those storms of life. And it's amazing to talk about storms because that's the weather we have with us today. It's been very wet out there. But in these times of trial, in these storms of life, we need to hold fast to God, and we know that the prize will be ready for us at the end.
Absolutely. But we will end our show here. Thank you for watching. We are the Patriots of Faith, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you for giving your time to us today.